Hello, my name is Stephen, I'm from K-Scale Models, and this is the Freeden 2 I've designed for 3D printing. It is from the show Gundam X, and it took a bit of work to do, so I want to show how I did it because some of the techniques I used in it were kind of interesting and might help others out. I've used a lot of lofts in this, and showing you how you can use them to create odd shapes might be useful. So let's go for it. First off, let's start at the beginning. So, first two sketches, these are the X and Y and Z heights of the object. So, we go into here, you can see I've taken the dimensions from the website for the official stats and just divide them by 1 over 1/700 to get me the actual size of this. So, done the exact same for the Z, and that's me got a box to fit in. Now, spoiler alert, my ship doesn't quite fit in here, but I'll explain that later. So, now we start getting on to the interesting bit, and that is how the rest of this was built. You see, the front of the ship is not a straight curve. It doesn't just curve that way, but also curves that way, and is curved all the way along here. So, that's a rather complex shape. We call them complex curves. So, easiest way I thought to do this was with a whole bunch of planes 1mm apart, so I'll just turn them on to show you the mess. And there you go, the mess. So if we then move forward on the timeline to all the different sketches and turn them on, turn off the construction lines for the moment just so you can see this. You now see what I was doing. Every single one of these is just a curve to match up with that and that. So it's now a right angle curve with a 0.2mm lip on it. And that's all the way along. So that's how I designed the top half. So if we now put a loft in, just go from each of these falling forward until it gets to the end, at which point it is just flat. So that's how that was done, and then it was just a simple case of mirror it over to the other side, and now I've got a complete shape. So if I take off the sketches, you'll get an idea what the front looks like. Moving on to the bottom half, if I go forward a couple and bring up the sketches, let's make sure that these are all off. Okay, so you can see the bottom half is much more angular, however, it's still to conform to this curve. So, more lofts. Now, go into this, you'll see what I did. Rather than a curve like what I did on the top, I did more angular shapes. So this is for all of these, all the way forward. This one is where I got a plane for these bits because this is a slightly different angle to the rest of it and was causing issues when I was doing the lofts. I'll show you when I get to that. Just getting all the sketches. So I've got a couple of them not supposed to be there. Okay, so now we've got the ones that we're actually interested in. All these different ones, just to give the shape. Now, first thing, lofted all those, so that gives me that shape. So you can see, that conforms to that shape, but yet is angular. Next one does this little bit here, because as I said, different angle. And then the last bit goes all the way to here. And again, what I just do with this is mirror over. And that's what we're looking for. So take off all of these just so you can see what the final result looks like. And there. That is the front of the hull. So that was quite difficult with all the different lofts and took me quite a while to figure out. So this was all merged together, and then I cut off that bit. This is just a simple cut command. So all these angles and sizes are more trial and error. Just trying to get the shape to look vaguely like what it is in the drawings. So extrude that part out, and this is where I start to make the turret. So cut a hole for that, turret, guns, and this is where I have to do another loft. So to get this shape, I lofted that all the way back to meet that point there. So, and then got it to follow that curve. So this is what this rail is. It's following the shape of this. So it cuts it out nicely and we get a nice clean shape. Do the same for the next bit, and then we simply do a draft to get that falling back. Now, these bits are just circles that have been rotated. So, gives a little more extra detail to the turrets. They don't really have a huge amount in the show. Then, mirror the whole lot over to there. And copy the guns forward, just to get an idea of what they look like. The guns are all the same throughout this. And then mirror them over. And that's the guns all done. So the next part I was doing was the little hump on top. So first thing I did was I extruded a little shape that was vaguely like the outline, but wasn't curved. Then I did the exact same as what I did for the hull. I used a bunch of planes, equally spaced 1mm, to create this. And then I lofted it all again. So we got loft going there, loft in the center, and loft there. The reason I've used 3 different lofts is to try to keep the shape square at the edges but rounded on top. So moving on to the rear of the hull, we extrude that back. So that just gives us a nice base to work with. Then we extrude that up. Again, we're just making a base to work with. However, this is where the real magic starts happening. Another loft. So that bit there, that bit there. I've worked it out so it just misses the little raised bit in the center. And then I've worked out roughly where I wanted to stop at the top, and then just lofted between the two. Now, I've mirrored this over, and then I've pushed the faces down so that it's all within the main hull. Because we don't want to see that bit, we're just wanting to see the bit that's actually on top. Merged all those bits together, and then I have extruded a little bit in the middle, to give us that nice angular shape that you see on the drawings. Lowered the rear hull down because we're actually going to have a raised bridge, and then I raise it up a little further because there is a flat bit before the bridge. I then just go and put in all the chamfers for here because this part back here is all fairly chamfered. So yeah, that's that section. Okay, so bridge section, well, I made a little sketch and extruded it up to make the basic shape of the bridge. Now, as you can see from that, that's not fully constrained. There's a reason for it. Gundam X ran a little short. It was supposed to be 49 episodes and ended up being 39, so 10 episodes short. The Freeden 2 came in at the latter half of that, so it was like the last 3 episodes. So it was probably meant to get more airtime, but didn't because the show was cut. You'd have to go and look in more of the history of that. I believe that the ratings weren't as good as they could be, although anyone who watched the show knows that it is a very good show. Now, the bridge does have a little hump on top of it. So, after mirroring everything over, I started to do a couple more lofts. So, that was the three to create the main hump of the bridge. However, rather than going and doing even more lofts, I used a little cheat, offset face. This follows the same sort of curve as the shape that is from. So, it went from there to there in the same curve that I was looking for. So that saved a whole bunch of time with more lofts, because every time you do a loft, there's a drawing associated with it. So yeah, a lot less time. Then I chamfered this flat bit down at the back, put in some windows at the front, merged everything together, and chamfered in those at the side to give us a nice little shape. So that's the main bridge section. The next section I made was little antenna radar something at the side of the bridge. So these are, again, complicated shapes. So I drew a basic outline, and then I started to trim off parts using lofts. So again, a whole bunch of planes, and then I lofted between 2 points. I then used the offset face to push that forward and make it all nice and flush. Following on from that, I made these little, suppose they're intakes? Not entirely sure, but that is what that section looks like. So, did it for both sides, and that gave me a nice shape. Then, again, lofted all the way back here. So that gives me, again, a complex shape. So, there you can see it's sort of bowing in a little. And now we get to this part, where it again bows in, and you can see it's all nice flat angles along here and then curves. So, difficult shape to produce. Again, to save me time, I just use offset planes to push and pull the planes in directions I was looking for. And that was that, apart from making a little extrusion into there to cut off a bit. And then, of course, mirroring it over to the other side, and that's the bridge. After detailing up the bridge, I moved on and did a bit more detail work on the rear. This will be added to later. All I did was really just add in this hatch for the hangar and chamfer off these sides. Moving on to the side of the hull though, I make the engines. So this shape here is again just not overly constrained, so I can move it around. And in the vague shape of what I'm looking for, mirror it over, chamfer and fillet all the edges, and then I'm making the intake here. So that is just extrusion and block in, and then I make these little triangle shapes. This is what it looks like. This is fully constrained because I wanted these to always match up with the intake sides. Because I was moving them around a lot, what I did was I just made them all equal, and then made this bit in here variable, and just said, yeah, everything here will be 0.5 millimeters off there, and there'll be 3 of them here, a 4th one here, mirror over, everything matches up. So that was a way of doing that. So yeah, makes a nice little vent. Moving on, I made a little intake at the top. Again, it's just a shape. I have constrained this one fully as I was playing around with it a lot. Chamfered all the sides, and then all this mess is me making this. Basically, I was needing a little gap all around it, and I was needing something to keep it actually fixed to the main body so that it could be printable. This bit here is just a sweep back of this to create an intake. The actual sweep length is just a case of that looks good. Now, this is one of the fins at the rear. You can see here when I've drawn it, I've drawn the whole thing. And then I've just extruded the little bit that I was needing for that. Then on the following drawing, all I've done is I have basically projected the previous drawing over, and that has let me use this. Now, the reason I used the projected drawing is because this was offset. You can go into here and do offset, and you can move the sketch over to wherever you need it, but I find it easier just to do that and then mirror it over. So this is me just making more of the shapes here. I'm going to add on one of the sketches because this kind of shows you what I'm going for some of these. So that's just another one of the fins. That's another one, almost at the end, and there. That's me now got the full length of the hull. So I'm good on that. Time to chamfer all this up, make it look good. Now you can see in here that hasn't chamfered up because this is all connected. So a couple of sweeps later, and it is now all chamfered up in there. So that looks good. So just cut out all those because they are supposed to be hollow. And this is where I'm adding in the engine. So a bunch of chamfers, make a hole, and that is the engine. It's not quite the whole nacelle done yet because that is the last bit. Just a bit of detail work that will be used later for the next part I'm working on is back to the bridge. This time though, we're dealing with the fins. Now, again, I've made it constrained with that to keep the height correct. So I've got the length and I've got the height. So 2 out of 3. So these are just some extrusions to sort of match up with the height I'm looking for and the width. Again, not overly constrained because I was moving those around. So a lot of work. Fill that off. And then, this is another bit I'm using extrusion for. I've taken one of these splines and made a curve out of it. So you go dun, 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 okay, and that gives you a sort of curve shape. So, done that there, and then I've done that down here. This gives me this shape. Now, you can see this all goes into the bridge, but on the final model, this is a separate part. So I will be cutting this off. So this is part of what this is. This is me going in there and cutting parts out to make it flat so that I can then go in and remove other bits, mirror it all over, extrude it down, and now I've got a flat base to work with. I use the cut feature on combine to create a hole. Now, if I go into bodies, this body, take that out, you can see the hole. So if I go all the way over here, all I do with this is I say offset by 0.2. The reason I do that is so that the parts fit together when you're trying to assemble them. I found that 0.02 is about what you'd be looking for a gap. You might get away with 0.1, but no. Okay, So this was just the little rear fin that is attached. So yeah, it's all fully printed on the bridge, which will be, if it isn't already by the stage of the drawing, its own separate part. Yes, it is. Okay, moving on, we go to the side fins. Now, this is where my plans kind of fall apart. It doesn't quite fit within my box. Now, I have done a huge amount to try to get it to fit in that. I've tried to say, okay, well, maybe it's the hull that fits in that, and the wings are just kind of extras that it's not taking over that. That is a huge gap and doesn't quite tie up. I went, okay, maybe the hull's thinner. Again, that is fairly thin compared to what you see on screen. So, this, I suspect, wasn't quite thought through when they were doing all the specs. So I've had to ignore that and go with just what looks right rather than what is dimensionally accurate according to the Wikipedia. So take these off. And what I'm doing here is I'm using draft commands to make these angled. Now, if I go back into this shape, you'll see that I actually did both the front and the back of that fin. This is because I'm making them two separate parts and then doing the same with drafting. Combine them so they're actually the same part, and then I will start to go and cut a hole in there to allow you to assemble the part. So that's all this is. And then just a little bit of detail there. This bit here does break one of my rules. When you do this, that there is very thin, less than 0.1 millimeter. Normally I would say a part needs to be at least 0.2 millimeter, but there is enough material all around it that this will work. So yeah, you can break those rules of sizes, but you've got to understand why it is that you're doing it that way, because yeah, that might not have worked. And to be honest, I test these to make sure that they do work before I release them. So if this hadn't worked, what I would do is I'd probably make these not as drastic, because they are 0.1. Might have made it only one side at 0.1 and the other side not at all. Something just to make it work, because at the end of the day, if it looks good but doesn't print, it's kind of pointless for 3D printing. Okay, moving on to the front of the hull. We are now dealing with the front fin. So that was just a bit extruded up, an offset, and then fillets. So that's pretty much that done. And all I'm doing here is I am just cutting bits away to allow me to make it into a 3D printable part that will be separate from the main body. Sometimes I will do this on models. I am at this point jumping back over to put a bit more detail into the rear thrusters. So that is just taking this plane and projecting that, and then just extruding a little bit all the way back to there to make it look right. This is not, again, fully dimensioned. That was just a case of that looks right. So then moving on, I'm just doing a bit more detail work on the actual hull. This is just a little shape like that on this plane, and then extruded to make that look right. Then I started using the drafts to make the shape the way I wanted it. So that draft pushes it this way, and then this draft pushes it that way. So it's going in two directions. Then I put some fins in with a sweep. So that again is just a little couple of blocks and then swept upwards to create the desired effect. Mirror that over, and we got it on both sides. Perfect. Moving to the rear of the hull, from the show you'll see that there's a little hump here. Guess how that was created? From all these planes and drawings. Yep, it was an R loft. And then, just to finish it off, at offset that will just push this all to be flat. So there. Moving back to the rear of the hull, we've got these little random thrusters. So that was just a little extrusion, circle. Then I start to use the draft command to create actual thrusters. So let's just go over what that was. So, yep, circles 0.3 millimeters. Then draft the outside and the inside. So, yep, that therefore creates the thrusters. Mirror that all over, and there you go. Here what I'm doing is I'm making a little peg. So, rectangle, as big as I can make it, but hidden behind the object. Extruded into there, 2 millimeters. Then I have offset from that little peg 0.2 millimeters all round and extruded back 5 millimeters. So I've made sure that it only cuts this object and not that one. So there. I also just do a bit of tidying up, and just combine that all, so that is now a solid piece. So next part I'm doing is the detail work. So that's just a little panel line created by an offset plane, an intersection drawing where I've just taken the project include intersect from this part. I've then drawn a little box at 0.3. I decided to go a bit deeper with this particular panel line than normal. I normally only do 0.2, but I decided 0.3 and 0.4 wide. So then I went around the whole thing with the sweep tool, and that created that panel line. So that's based on the previous video. That's how I do a lot of these. Then I'm doing the same sort of thing for here. This is for the main structure itself. I have taken off a little bit here and just extruded that all the way around with a sweep. So that sweep profile does go all the way around. So yeah, there you go. And this is me just detailing up the side part. So dimensioned that all up and just extruded it in. And then I do the exact same for this part. Create its own little bits. I've done the same up here, just a couple of little squares. Oh, and of course done them on the bottom. This will have just been a projection of the one on top. And then this is actually the rear door being done. So again, I'm using 0.3. You can get away with 0.2, but I'm going to make them big and chunky in this case. So there. That is that, and then just extrude it in. and then a bit more detail there, and that's the rear hatch done. So this is on the side of that. So yeah, this case I just drew that all up and extruded these two little bits. That is just how I'm doing detailing. I'm just going around picking parts and drawing little squares roughly where I believe they should be based on the drawings that I've got. So this one is on the engine. So it's just that. That was me just filling in gaps, making sure there was no voids that resin could accumulate, because that could be a pain. And then that was me just making sure that there was no gap there, so it was all solid. Then mirror that over to the other side, so detail on both sides of that. A couple more squares. Mirror that over. Mirror the whole engine block over. So now I've got the full engine block. So this is really starting to look right. Bit more detail work, as you can see here. So where's this one? Oh, this isn't actually detail work. That is me doing the sort of peg for the bridge. So that's that. That'll be me making the peg there. So sometimes what I'll do is I will cut the hole and then make the peg for it, rather than make the peg and then cut the hole for it. It just sometimes makes more sense to do that. Now this was to fix something that the computer was not happy with earlier. Let's go back a stage. This bit here is attached to that. However, this body 67 is this bit here. It refused to connect to these bodies. No matter what I did, it was just creating errors. So I went in, cut the whole thing in two, and then mirrored it over. So that's why you can see this line down the middle. That's just me mirroring it all over. So here, all I'm doing is I've taken this and offset 0.3 and extruded back. Not the cleanest way of doing it. The shape doesn't quite continue, but it's 0.3 millimeters. You're unlikely to be able to see that at that scale. So later on though, I have done some extrusions, or sweeps. So what is this? There's a little band that goes around here. So I've just taken the profile and I swept it. Now this is very much a case of doing it by eye. It's very complicated to get this to work, so I just kind of messed around until it did work. And I've done a similar bit, or should have underneath. What's this one? Oh yeah. These were little bits of fun. Taking the shape. So what I did here was I went, okay, I want to have a rectangle at this part. Make it 0.2 millimeters. And then offset 0.3. So really hard to see, but yeah. So this sort of keeps it same sort of pattern as that. Then I make another one a couple of millimeters long using these planes to determine where they are, and then loft between. And I have to do this for a couple other shapes, so that's those two. Mirror them all over because I'm lazy and I'm not going to draw them all again. And then I'm doing very similar bits up here. And then make a little pattern of them, mirror the whole lot over, little fins. So on the first iteration, I only had fins on this side, not on both sides. So that was one of the only errors of the whole model, was that this was not mirrored. So I always count that as a victory if I get one or two things wrong, and I always correct them before the public release. So that is the underside bit I was talking about a moment ago. In this case, it's actually a loft. So I've just went in there, said offset that 0.2, and then loft it between the two. And this is me now mirroring those fins over. So that is how I built the Freeden 2. Very nice little model, but very complicated, and I was pulling my hair out for a lot of it because of these shapes here and the bridge section here. Once I got those done and I could move on to something like the engine bays, it became a lot easier to work with. As I said, one of the biggest regrets I've got for this is it doesn't quite fit in my box. So height and length, fine. Width, no. As I said, it doesn't match up with the wiki figures, but it will look accurate according to the show. And as anyone who has worked on any models or 3D images from Gundam shows will know, they can change size. It's just part of how the work's done. If you don't notice it whilst you're watching the show, the artist has done a good job. So yeah. So until next time, my name's Stephen, and I'm from K-Scale Models.